The Douglas Coleman Show is made possible with support from Seth David Radwell, a recent guest on the program and author of American Schism, How the Two Enlightenments Hold the Secret to Healing Our Nation, released this past July. As Publishers Weekly writes in its recent glowing book life review of American Schism, business executive Radwell's epic debut examines the historical influences that have led to what he sees as the collapse of politics in the United States. Seth Radwell makes the case that the current chasm between the American right and left can be traced back to the 18th century's Age of Enlightenment and the basic tenets of liberty, equality, and reason. American Schism provides a historical perspective that can help us fight today's unreason with reason and bridge current-day divides. American Schism by Seth David Radwell is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and wherever books are sold. For more information, go to AmericanSchismBook.com.
It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Dr. Carole Lieberman. Hello, Dr. Lieberman. How are you?
Hi there. Fine, thank you.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. Let's see. The terrorist therapist. That's kind of a tongue twister. That's what you're famously known as, yeah?
Well, I'm actually famously known as America's Psychiatrist, but under that, I have a number of different pet areas of specialization. And one of my especially passionate areas that I'm passionate about is terrorism, because I'm a born and bred New Yorker. And so when 9/11 happened, even though I was already living in California, my heart was still in New York and is still in New York. And I decided that what could I do? I asked myself on 9/11, what could I do to help people with this event and the future of terrorism, to help people cope with it in the future. You know, not only the memories of 9/11, in other words, but the future terror attacks. And believe me, there will be many to come. So I did a whole bunch of things. I wrote 2 books on terrorism, and I do interviews, and I do speaking engagements, and for the 20th anniversary of 9/11, one of the things that's been bothering me for these 20 years is that each year the commemoration of 9/11, the anniversary, gets littler and littler. There is a trend. Some people want us to forget that it happened and that it is still the biggest threat to America. I mean, yes, there's North Korea and there's China and Russia and all of that, but really the most imminent threat is terrorism from Al-Qaeda and ISIS and now the Taliban. And they have been not wasting any time during COVID. They have been using this time to recruit more people, because so many more people have been on the internet during COVID, during lockdown, that, scrolling around and, finding propaganda from these terrorist organizations. So they have not gone away. They are not forgetting about their ultimate goal of taking over the West and instituting Sharia law and so on. And with what happened in Afghanistan, that has invigorated all terrorist groups, because when Biden surrendered to the Taliban, that gave all the terrorist groups hope that, and made them realize that America is a lot weaker than we were at 9/11.
Do you think our government is not doing enough or taking the threat of terrorism seriously?
That is an understatement. Trump did a ton of stuff to help combat terrorism. He, in all different ways, making our military stronger, defeating the caliphate of ISIS, and targeting certain leaders, terrorist leaders, and so on, killing them. And Biden is so, either he is so, that's a whole other thing, but I think Biden's mental capacity, he has encroaching dementia. I've been saying this for a long time, and it's gotten worse and worse. But it's either attributable to that, that he really wasn't able to have a thinking that you need to be able to look at all be able to look at the future. Like, in other words, if you're playing a chess game, for example, good chess players not only can think of the next move for themselves, but then anticipate the move, what that move will do to the next person, and when that, they can think
right.
Far ahead.
Yeah.
And I don't think that he has that capacity, but I think it's more malignant than that. There has to be, this can't all be just out of stupidity or ignorance or dementia. There has to be something, more, something worse afoot. Look at there have been 60,000 Afghans who have been airlifted or whatever brought into America. Some of them are even still waiting in other countries to still come. And they are being seated all over America. Yes, a number of them did help our troops, but not all of them. And there certainly wasn't enough vetting to be able to tell who amongst them were actual jihadists. And it's been the stations, the bases that they're at so far in America. There have been all kinds of problems. It is really hard to bring a person who is used to that kind of life in Afghanistan to America and expect them to be able to, adjust quickly. There have been for example, some of them brought their underage brides because that was permitted in Afghanistan. I
did see that news article, yeah. That's a whole nother topic. Let me ask you then, assuming that this is an imminent threat, which it seems like it is, what kind of advice can you offer for people to help them in a therapeutic sense? Because we obviously can't live our lives in fear and just stay locked up in our house. We have to get on with what we do and be out and about. But what kind of advice can you offer for people to kind of cope with this idea?
For one thing, we have to break through our denial. If you went on the street and asked the first 10 Americans, how worried they are about terrorism. Oh, I forgot to mention, I do a podcast called The Terrorist Therapist Show, which is essentially a weekly podcast, and I talk about the top stories in terrorism of that week. And so that is why I am up on all of these things. And so the first thing, Americans need to break through their denial that there are not going to be any more attacks. Then they need to look at this as a long-term prospect. There haven't been attacks during COVID because we weren't out on the streets or in concert halls and so on. But, now it's changing. They're already, they're being called the bedroom radicals, people who, as I was talking about earlier, people who were on their computer and got, read the propaganda and so on and are planning attacks. So that's the first thing. Then they need to think of it as a long-term project where parents and children, families, and schools need to really concentrate on building resilience for everybody. Physical resilience, which of course has been, hurt by COVID. We read every day, we hear about, the mental and physical problems that people are having because of basically because of the lockdowns, not just because of COVID. And so we have to build ourselves back up and even better than we were before COVID. And we also have to build ourselves up psychologically. we have to prepare ourselves for realizing that these kinds of things are going to happen, but we shouldn't hide under the covers. I'm certainly not telling people that this is because of all this is going to happen, we should all just stay under our covers. Rather, the opposite. We need to live our life to the fullest every day, to enjoy what we have, and really, when my first book about terrorism was called Coping with Terrorism, Dreams Interrupted. It was published in London for the first year anniversary of their 9/11, which was 7/7/2005. And then my latest book, Lions and Tigers and Terrorists, Oh My, How to Protect Your Child in a Time of Terror, is for kids, and it's also for parents and teachers, anybody who has anything to do with kids. And the first half of the book helps the grown-ups learn how to talk to kids about terrorism, how to notice symptoms in their kids that are related to hearing about terrorism or perhaps being near a terror attack. And then the second half of the book is a picture book for kids, telling them it's like Terrorism Light, Terrorism 101. It tells the truth, but in ways that are it's a picture book, so it's in ways that are not terribly frightening. For example, for the question, what is a terrorist? I have a picture of a bully on the playground trying to intimidate someone, and the answer is a terrorist is like a bully on the playground. And then, in the grown-ups part, I have a longer answer to that question. Depending upon how old your child is and how mature they are and all that, you would go into more details. But it's really, we know, all of us know some of the things that we should be doing to make ourselves stronger and to psychologically and physically, but not everybody has done that or even if they did some of that during COVID. During COVID, I've been talking all about what to do to help your immune system and so on. But even if they did do it during COVID and lockdown, some of them may be starting to think it's over, to think they survived and they don't have to do anything that's good for their body or their mind every day. And that's not true. They really need to either continue what they've been doing, the good things they've been doing, or start.
Did you have a lot of people come to you with psychological issues during COVID? I mean, people who were locked down for months and months at a time, going stir crazy in their house?
Yes, there were some. I continued treating my patients through Zoom and phone, mostly Zoom. And so, yes, they were having all kinds of issues related to lockdowns. And kids, some of them had kids, and kids are really having a hard time dealing with schools having been closed and not seeing their friends, and just it was just too big a concept. The world has totally changed from COVID, in the sense that, not just about people getting sick, but in the sense that, so much has happened at the same time, really, between George Floyd and the riots and COVID, and just things that, you open up the news, you go to the internet and you pick up any news platform, and things that you see on there every day, it's like, just this morning I was saying, even the best Hollywood writer would not have come up with some of these crazy things that are happening. So it's very overwhelming, especially for kids, but certainly also for grown-ups too, because it's, things that were one way are now all of a sudden different. From defunding the police, for example. Now, how stupid. You don't have to be a psychiatrist or anybody with any education to realize that if there are no police or fewer police, there are going to be more criminals. And in fact, there are. And there have been more violence this year than since George Floyd than ever. There's more, the things that are out there that are supposed to calm racism are really making racism a lot worse. People weren't really thinking in those terms before as much as they are now. because of all the, I just was reading this morning about a Rutgers professor who was telling people to kill white people, telling people in general. I mean, I guess, I don't know who her audience was, but her message was that people should kill white people because they don't get it or something. I mean, can you imagine that? A good school like Rutgers having a professor that would say something like that. The world has gone crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty outrageous. And I think a lot of stuff has happened, you're right, over the past 18 months. And I think people are going to need time to digest everything that's happened because there's just too much thrown at them all at one time. When we get like that kind of sensory overload, that's when people start going nuts, I think. When they get too much information thrown at them all at the same time. I wanted to ask you. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, it's okay. Okay, since Halloween is coming, and you had mentioned kids, I saw this on your LinkedIn profile, and I just wanted to ask about it because I never heard of it. It says, "Just say no to Squid Game costumes for Halloween." What is that?
Yes.
I don't even know what it is.
Okay. Well, I'll put you in the loop.
Okay.
Squid Game is this show on Netflix that has it's a very sort of sci-fi kind of show, futuristic, however you want to describe it. It's not like anything anybody has seen before. And the story is, it starts out with this one guy who is the protagonist, and he it was written by a South Korean writer who was going through financial problems when he wrote it in 2008. And he blamed capitalism for his problems. And so the story starts out with a man who is having financial problems and in Squid Game. And it turns out his problems are partly because he was divorced and partly because he's a compulsive gambler and various things. And so he lives with his mother, and he doesn't have any money, and he needs money, not, to buy luxuries necessarily, but to buy, his wife divorced him and is taking his child to America, and so he wants to fight her for custody, so he needs money for that. And then his elderly mother got sick, and he needs money to pay for her hospital bills. And so he needs money for serious things. And he gets invited to be in this game, in Squid Game. And that's a game, a futuristic kind of game where they have they've gotten 456 people, 456 people, who also are like him, are desperate for money. And they make them play these games. And the reason why it's called Squid Game is because one of the games, the last game, is actually a game called Squid Game in South Korea. And it's like a playground game. And all the games, they have to play 6 games, and all the games are children's games. And, the first one is red light, green light, for example. And the idea is, so there are 456 people, and the idea is they're going to whittle it down to one winner. And so all the rest of the people get killed along the way in various ways. If they lose the games, many people lose at one time. And then also interpersonal violence, the people start, being violent with each other. And anyway, I'm not going to spoil the end for your listeners, but so Halloween, so there are Squid Game costumes. There's a costume for the players, the 456 players. They wear sort of a jogging type costume. Everyone wears the same thing, and then with a number on it. So there's one number, 001 to 456. And then the other kind of costume is the costume of the guards, which is this shocking pink costume, like a jumpsuit with a mask. And so those are both very striking kinds of costumes, and those are going to be very popular costumes. They are already very popular costumes for Halloween. And I'm trying to warn people, yes, just say no, because this movie television show, whatever you want to call it, a show on Netflix, is very, very violent. You come to know a group of the characters, and you like them, and you identify with them. And so when they get killed, it's very painful. I mean, it was well written because it does connect you with the characters, but it's just very, very sadistically violent. I mean, the way they kill, 50 people at once, let's say, because they lose a game, one of the 6 games. It's just very overwhelming. The violence is overwhelming, and the violence between the people, the individuals who you get to know somewhat, is worse because you care about the people, and it's just even worse. So I am, when people wear costumes, whatever the costume, especially kids, they generally kind of like to play out the scenario, right? And so, like, if they're a cowboy, they'll act out like a cowboy or something like that. A witch, they'll pretend to be a witch. And so with these characters from Squid Game, what they'd be acting out is violence. That's really all there would be to act out.
Have there been any instances of kids in Squid Game costumes actually committing violent acts?
Not that I have come across yet, but we haven't had Halloween yet.
Well, that's true. It's 2 days away.
So we'll see. We'll see what happens. I've been an activist against media violence for years and years. I was the head of the National Coalition on TV Violence, and I testified before Congress 3 times about media violence. So this isn't like just some random thing. I have been trying to explain to people about the dangers of media violence for many years.
Well, I mean, media violence is nothing new. I grew up watching Bugs Bunny and Roadrunner cartoons that were incredibly violent. There have been shootings and killings in movies since the movies began, back in the turn of the century. But why is it...
That is the typical response.
But why is it...
that I get...
Why is it only, now that people are so concerned about it? Because we didn't all grow up to be murderers.
Wait, it's not only now. I've been talking about this for decades. But the violence has gotten worse. I mean, certainly with video games today, there has been nothing worse than that over the years. And there have been studies for decades that showed that the more violent media that somebody consumes, the more hours, of violent media that somebody consumes, and of course it depends upon the how sadistic the violence is and so on as well, but the more of that one consumes, the more violent one is going to become. Now, not everybody becomes a serial killer. I know that's where you were going. Not everybody becomes a serial killer, but certainly our society has become more violent. There's more domestic violence, for example. There's more road rage. There's more airplane rage now. So we have become more aggressive.
I'm not going to argue with you that the society has become more violent. My question is, is it a direct result of media consumption or not?
I don't think it's a coincidence that the media has gotten more violent and the people have gotten more violent. But also in scientific studies, I mean, they knew this years ago. And so, but little was done. I mean, I was involved in making rules for television shows and so on. But so I won't say that nothing was done, but not enough, especially with video games.
Well, I think it's the responsibility of the parents also to monitor what it is that their kids are consuming.
Yes, absolutely. But the sad part is that the kids who are more likely to be plopped in front of a television set or a video game are the kids who typically come from broken families, or they're depressed. They're not having a great family life. And they are more vulnerable to these kinds of things. All the school shooters, the famous school shooters, have had an obsession with violent video games.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. I don't know. I get. What can we do about it? Do we need to monitor the TV studios and the producers and tell them to tone it down?
Well, yes. And, but as I said, I was involved with doing that for a long time. And, it helped somewhat, but, and television television has toned down some. But movies and video games have, each one wants to push the envelope further.
Yeah. a couple of movies that I just watched. I'm not going to name them, but the typical gunfight. I mean, the blood was splattering a lot more than than it ever used to, and body parts flying in different directions and things. And yeah, it certainly is getting more graphic. But
yes, I mean, with special effects, now there are newer, fancier special effects. So
yeah,
they want to use them.
Yeah, true enough. Well, Dr. Lieberman, we do have to wrap this up. We are out of time. Do you have a website that you want to give out? You've probably got a lot of websites, but one particular one you want to give out?
Yeah, sure. Well, let's see. We were talking about terrorism, so one of my websites is terroristtherapist.com.
Okay.
And also, I also have a Twitter feed, which is at Dr. Carole MD, at DrCarolemD. Okay.
And the terrorist therapist link, is there links to purchase your books there as well?
You got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing. Best of luck with everything you're doing.
Well, thank you so much.
I hope this Halloween goes by that I don't see a Squid Game costume, because if I do, then I'm gonna end up starting to watch the show, and it doesn't sound like anything I want to watch.
Well, it's interesting, but people have to remember there is this underlying plan of the writer to show that capitalism is bad. That is the underlying. He's admitted it. That is what he believes, and that's what he wants to show.
So not only is it violence, but it's communist propaganda as well, yeah?
Exactly.
Well, that's great. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. It was nice meeting you. Take care.
Nice meeting you, too.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on The Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Douglas Coleman's Don't Do a Podcast is a dryly humorous rant about Douglas's pet peeve, the unrelenting torrent of podcasts hitting the web on a constant basis. As technology has put podcasting within the reach of anyone, many wholly unqualified people have taken the plunge. This witty polemic tries to persuade them from broadcasting their drivel using Douglas's brand of sarcastic humor. Now on Amazon, only 99 cents.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Are you an independent musician? How would you like to have your songs played on hundreds of radio stations just like the one you're listening to right now? Join MusicSubmit.com and we'll promote your music to radio stations and blogs in your genre. It's free to set up your account, and we guarantee your music will be considered for airplay by radio stations worldwide. Why not sign up today? It's free. MusicSubmit.com. Radio promotion for indie musicians.
Hey, this is Ray Powers. Don't touch anything. You've got it right where you need it. Tuned in to The Douglas Coleman Show. You heard me.
Okay, please welcome to The Douglas Coleman Show, Anne Michaud. How are you?
Hi, Douglas. Great. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. So you are quite an accomplished journalist. Looks like you've won many awards for your writing. And you've got a book out now called Why They Stay, Sex Scandals, Deals, and Hidden Agenda of 8 Political Wives.
Correct.
You want to give us a little bit of your backstory, or do you want to just dive right into the book?
Oh, well, sure. I can talk about myself. I grew up in on the North Shore, Boston, and have worked at various newspapers around the country, partly, moving around for family reasons, and partly it's been a wild couple of decades in media, so it's been a lot of movement for me. And I was most recently a reporter with the Wall Street Journal, and I'm currently just 2 weeks into a new job with Crain's New York Business, where we cover business topics in New York City. So I'm really enjoying that.
Okay.
And throughout my travels, I have covered politics, and as you saw in my write-up, I'm sure, when I was in Ohio, I covered Bill Clinton's re-election campaign and went on a train that his campaign had chartered throughout the couple of states there. And I also have worked in New York politics covering politics for a number of years, and met two of the other gentlemen whose stories I wrote about in my book. Elliot Spitzer, who was the governor of New York and whose story was the inspiration for the TV show The Good Wife, and Anthony Weiner, who political downfall actually became messed up in some of the Hillary Clinton email fiasco that involved having James Comey say that he was reopening the investigation into Hillary Clinton. So a lot of connections there to scandals in politics.
Well, it sounds like it. And I suppose that was probably a lot of the inspiration to write this book, yeah?
Yeah, I guess I grew frustrated with the sort of one-dimensional way that we in the media were covering these events. We'd, note whether the wife was standing there or not beside the man as he talked about his scandal, talked about, whether he's sorry or resigning or, going to carry on. And I just thought that we covered it for a couple of days. We walked away. We maybe wrote about his career again. But there were a lot of questions in my mind about the women who were with them, who always seemed very high-powered, polished, intelligent, accomplished. And so I kind of wondered, what they were thinking as they went through this. It was a huge disruption in their lives, and many of them stayed in the marriage. So I got curious.
Do you think that whole concept of the First Lady is kind of an antiquated institution? I mean, the concept that the woman has to sort of support her husband and stand behind him and sort of take a back seat to his career. I mean, because that's what it appears to look like.
Yeah, I think, for a long time, it's almost like politics is a little bit of a theatrics, right? Like
exactly.
You put out a postcard of your family with the family dog and the children, and everybody's looking all nicely scrubbed, and that's supposed to stand in for the candidate has good character. So I think with the women standing behind the man, I think that's also supposed to convey a message. This isn't that bad a guy. He might have made mistakes. We've all made mistakes. I still love him. And I think that you would do well to continue to support him.
Well, I mean, it is kind of slick to do that. I'm just wondering how much value there is in that kind of imagery these days, because certainly women have made leaps and bounds in terms of their abilities individually, without necessarily having to be on the coattails of a man, of the husband. So I'm wondering if in terms of the First Lady image, if that is still a kind of a viable realistic image anymore.
Well, I hear you. I mean, I think that's part of the cognitive dissonance in my head about who these women were and what I saw in private life. A lot of women achieving independence, or, you know, and then there was this sort of display for voters that was giving a different message and saying, you know, I need to seem to be the number two in this relationship for some reason. And I think it was to appeal to voters. But to your point, I ended up taking someone from history from the 1400s to use as a metaphor for this, the way that these wives have acted. And she was known as the White Queen in the England's War of the Roses. And I used her as a way to say, well, this is a woman who was, through marriage, made her way in the world, married a king, got positions for all of her siblings at court, and became, actually found her daughter married and founded the Tudor dynasty, which Henry VIII, Elizabeth I. So, you know, a big deal. And I took her and rated each of the women, the 8 women in my book, on a scale of 1 to 10 based on how closely they seem to follow this same path of Elizabeth Woodville, the White Queen.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, speaking of Elizabeth, I mean, there's a perfect example of the kind of the role being switched around with the present-day Queen Elizabeth and her late husband, Prince Philip, who always had to walk behind her in any public event. And, you know, they were together for, how long were they together? 70 years? Something like that.
Yeah. Long marriage.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I would assume that he understood where he where he stood in that marriage, at least in a public sense. What they got up to in private, I have no idea. But when they were out in public, she's the queen, he's the prince. And it was very defined as to, you know, who was the boss. Well, that's interesting. Okay, well, let me touch on a couple of specific couples here that I see on your bio. The one I wanted to do first was Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, because that one, he very publicly had many affairs with different women. There's been countless things written about that. Eleanor stayed with him, and because of his polio, where he couldn't really get out, she did a lot of his campaigning for him and did that. But she also had her own life. I know she had a radio show, she had a newspaper column, she had all kinds of things. And back in those days, that was a lot more unusual for a woman to be doing that. And particularly as the First Lady.
It really was.
Yeah. And particularly as the First Lady, she was sort of setting the trend, I think, for what was to come. Where after the war, when women started to go to work and be more independent and not just be the housewife staying at home and the man supporting the family, right? So what insights can you give us on that particular relationship?
Well, I think she, one of the reasons she took that role as First Lady was because the economic times were so dire and the war. She talked about her column as a way to comfort people, comfort the American people, and let them know that the White House was listening, which I thought was kind of charming. And she was, I would say, more neat before she found out about Franklin's affair, or his first affair. And I think that really catalyzed her to set out and take her life in her hands. She wasn't going to get a divorce. At the time, it was a lot more rare. And also, they were financially dependent on Franklin's mother, and she threatened to cut them off if they got divorced. They had 5 kids already at the time, and Eleanor has said she stayed for the sake of the children. But she definitely charted her own independent path not entirely to benefit her husband, but absolutely she did. She was his legs, I guess, as the famous saying, and she brought a lot of causes to him that she felt he should act on as president.
I think it's a very interesting relationship that they had, and there's been a lot of documentaries made about it. I'm kind of fascinated by their particular relationship, but I think given the circumstance, I think she did incredibly well for herself as well as for her husband.
Yeah, I think she was one of the great leaders of our time. I mean, I think about the International Declaration of Human Rights that she worked on and put a lot of the soul into that document, which reflects a lot of the American declarations. So really a great lady.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I think we've got time for one more. Do you want to pick one? Or do you want me? Which couple?
You go ahead. It's your show.
All right, let's see. Well, I'm torn between Jack and Jackie and Donald Trump and Melania, but all right, let's go with Trump and Melania. And the tagline says, "A foreigner's desire to live the American dream." So what do you have to say about this one?
Well, I didn't know a lot about Slovenia, where Melania grew up, before I started the research. And I didn't really even know much about Ivana, Donald's first wife. But I did find in their upbringing and a lot of commonalities from Eastern Europe. And I think that I came to the conclusion that Melania and Ivana probably see marriage in a slightly different way than Americans. They're more comfortable with an authoritarian man in their lives. And I think you do see that Melania has her separate sphere, and she has said many times, Donald, politics, that's his thing, and I'm going to do mine. And she supports him, but I don't think that there's a sort of a meshed relationship that you find with some of our other couples.
Well, isn't that sort of true, though, more these days, generally speaking, for married couples than it was 50, 60 years ago? I mean, just as an example, I've been married for 15 years, happily married, but we have completely separate lives and careers. And then we have our time together. But, I can go all day without seeing my wife. And she's off doing her thing, and I'm doing mine. We don't work together. We have our own life together. But we built our lives first before we got married. We got married, we were both in our 40s when we got married.
Yeah.
Which is late by, traditional standards. We don't have any children. So everything for us is just about our respective careers, and then we share that life together. I think that's kind of the way it's going these days. What do you think?
Could be. I just would contrast, for example, Hillary and Bill Clinton, who seemed to have this vision of what they wanted to do together and accomplish together politically. And I felt as though the Trump, Melania, that wasn't her thing.
Right. Well, yeah, that's interesting.
I have no problem with couples having separate spheres in their lives. I think it's great.
That's interesting, though, about the Clintons, is because essentially they aspired to do the same thing. I mean, he was president, and then she ran twice. So, right, they had sort of the same objectives, where none of the other wives, I don't think, had any aspiration to do what their husband was doing. I couldn't imagine Jackie Kennedy running for president. I just don't think that she would have been interested to do that.
But you do see that they're, like, for example, Hilda Spitzer had a number of causes that she was working on as before they got to the governor's mansion. But even once she was there, that I know that she had a lot of regret about leaving for children's welfare and the environment. And I think even Huma Abedin is married or was married to Anthony Weiner. I think she's absolutely got political causes. Elizabeth Edwards, who's not in my book, but she and her husband John, who's the former U.S. Senator from North Carolina, she wrote a lovely autobiography about them working on causes together to try to eradicate poverty.
I think personally for me, I wouldn't want to be married to somebody who was going the same political or career path as I was. I think it'd be too much like competition. And I just wouldn't feel comfortable with that. I think that could create a lot of unnecessary problems that certainly being in a marriage has its own problems inherently. And we would just be adding to that if we were pursuing the same path, I think. But that's just my personal thought on that. You know, one thing good about...
Well, now you make me happy I didn't marry a journalist.
Well, okay. You know, the one good thing about my wife and my marriage is that what we do is completely different. What she can do, I haven't the clue, and vice versa, you know. So it's great. So it's sort of like a mutual admiration. You know, I'm very envious of what she's able to do. She does these incredible designs, fashion designing, and has a whole has a business doing that. And I mean, I can't draw a stick figure to save my life, so. You know, what she could do on the drawing board is unbelievable. You know, by the same token, I'm also a musician and a songwriter, and she's definitely not musically gifted. So it worked out really well. But I don't know. It can. Yeah, it can. I think, well, just as a last question, as a kind of a wrap-up to that, what do you think works better? Or is there a formula? Do you think opposites attract, or do you think people that are like-minded will do better together? Or is it not that simple?
Well, I have sometimes thought, wouldn't it be nice if my husband understood deadlines and those sorts of things, the pressures that I face. But he's a procurement specialist, and when we met, he was buying tuna fish for Starkist Tuna, and now he does that. He's done that across various industries, from software to other types of seafood, and so anyway, he's just. We always joke that we got together because we were opposites. A friend of ours fixed us up because he had been in the Army. He had been a Green Beret, and I had been in the Peace Corps. So my friend thought it would be funny that Dan would be more conservative and I would be more liberal. And but funny enough, you know, and maybe this is hindsight, but I feel like we, you know, we met on the level of both really valuing family, really valuing communication, and being having each other's backs. And so I think there are some things that probably it's good to have in common.
I agree. I think the important thing, at least for me, is that my spouse needs to be my best friend. I think above all else, passion comes and goes. The honeymoon is over after a while. And once you start getting real with people, you know, that's the true test of a enduring relationship. That's a whole topic for another show. We do have to wrap this up. Thanks so much for coming on. Your book, again, is called Why They Stay, Sex Scandals, Deals, and Hidden Agendas of 8 Political Wives. Is the book available now?
It is. You can buy it on IndieBound, Books A Million, Amazon, Barnes & Noble.
Okay.
It's available both as an ebook and paperback. And
last thing is, do you have a website that you want to give out?
Sure. It's AnneMichaud.com. So it's ANNEMICHAUD.
Okay, great. Well, Anne, thanks so much for coming on. This was a nice conversation. Nice meeting you. Best of luck with the book.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.